Yes, yes. Welcome to the ancient world of tabletop games. I am Agamemnon, from the historical documentary, Time Bandits. This is a report from a fugitive. The role-playing game Cliché, whether fantasy or science fiction, is that our heroes meet at the inn or in the tavern. Tolkien stands out as an example with a party of adventurers assembling at the Prancing pony. George Lucas has a go at this in the cantina, introducing Han and Chewie to the old man and the kid. For beginners, I'll do a more detailed series on just exactly what the hell role-playing games are. But I thought I'd start the RPG videos with this cliché and answer the question: have I used this barroom rendezvous in my own games? Whether playing published adventures or running a homebrewed piece of nonsense, the answer is yes. I'll give two examples of games that veered sharply from the planned adventure right at the start, in the inn. The first example was a game of Dungeons and Dragons. There are many problems with the game if you stop to think for a microsecond. The economy must be distorted by all the magic in the game, reality must be distorted by all the magic in the game, and so on. We're talking about a game system that is broken into levels, and characters at first level have money to burn on equipment. With vital gear purchased, what else is there to spend cash on? Each gold coin is worth 10 silver, and each silver coin is worth 10 copper. Inflation never comes into it. This basic exchange rate cuts across different editions of the rules down the centuries. Well, players assembled. They created characters, and there was money left over. One player went on a spending spree. He's heard there's adventure to be had, and he's on his way to scout out this terrible network of caves packed with monsters. What does a player do in those circumstances? Anything and everything. A question comes up. What can I do with all this money I have left after buying my equipment? Other players are mystified. They have spent their starting loot on basic equipment. The player revealed the truth. He had all these copper coins left. Laughter. No one spends the copper coins. What food can you buy for 2 copper? Well, you could buy an entire loaf. For 2 copper? Fuck this, I'll buy a tray and cream cakes. The adventure started with rumours of evil brewing under the hills and cream cakes. Our hero handed out cream cakes to the villagers while explaining how he would single-handedly use his awesome magical prowess to clear the nest of evil and return hope and prosperity to the land. Now, the land seemed prosperous enough to produce cream cakes, but that is a different story. All this adventuring, walking down the street, giving cakes away, was tiring. Our hero decided to stop off at the inn for a night's rest before embarking on the true adventure. At the inn, there was even more food to be had for small sums of money. Our heroic wizard settled at a long bench and ordered a hearty feast. He even handed bowls of stew around the table. Other players sat at empty places or were already installed, waiting to introduce themselves to one another, that they might form a last alliance of cake-eaters and elves to take on the hordes and loot their golden teeth. Subplots are things you can easily swerve. Our heroes decided to swerve the subplot. With night drawing in at the inn, players noticed a lone figure at the end of the bar, turned against the other patrons, using her hooded cloak to shield herself from banter. There's a subplot, folks. Clearly, the players didn't want to know. They engaged in banter and decided they'd all march against the forces of darkness in the morning. But the wizard knew this young woman was of importance. He sidled up to the bar and hopped onto the stool next to her, and that's when he cast his spell. Unseen Servant. It is what it sounds like, a magical creation that acts as an invisible butler following instructions. The other players leaned in, wondering how badly this would go. Badly. The wizard uttered his commands. Unseen Servant, start ripping my clothes off as if I'm being molested by this young woman. The players regretted being seen in the company of this wizard. our wizardy fools started protesting about being bothered by the lusty young woman. I decided this was the best time to introduce the deeper portion of the subplot. Guards burst into the room, and the leader uttered a proclamation, a reward for news of the king's daughter. The princess has gone missing, and there she is, being molested by that man. Other players stood to leave. Kidnappers, they're all in it together. Seize them. One swordsman wondered casually how large the nearest window was, asking for a friend. All the while, the unseen servant kept at it, rapidly undressing the wizard. Players threatened to report the wizard to the Union for unseen servants, phantasmal workers, and illusory assistants. With plenty of confusion, a window-based escape was inevitable. The princess teamed up reluctantly with the party of adventurers. Most of them looked for a chance at compensation from the king for returning his daughter safely. She was on the run to save her man, believed abducted by monsters. The wizard spent the rest of the journey to the dungeon making humorous comments about the princess. And that's one way to start an adventure inside an inn. There's a way to stop an adventure by starting at a tavern, and I must now relate that incident. I don't have the associated game, but I've inherited the equipment. This map is from a Tolkien-themed effort called MERP, Middle-earth Role-Playing. Publisher Iron Crown Enterprises lost the license and ditched Tolkienisms by renaming the game HARP, High Adventure Role-Playing. But before all that, there was a deal to let Games Workshop publish an edition of MERP with cover art by Chris Achilleos, and that edition came with this map arrangement based on Games Workshop's dungeon floor plans. It appears to be a reasonable tavern, except for bloodstains at the well and those curious footprints yonder. You have an adventure right here, set at the inn. The owners are evil, smuggling all sorts of nastiness through the tunnel network beneath the building. Flip the map over for part 2 of that story. I used this tavern map to set the scene of an introductory adventure. The first time I read Runequest, I absolutely detested the rules. I didn't think my players would go for it, but I returned to the fray and tried the opening scenario. Our heroes stopped off at the Bouncing Buffalo, a nod to Tolkien's Prancing Pony on the way to adventure, though it's also the Bounding Buffalo I notice now in the text. The game of Dungeons and Dragons jumped the rails and somehow managed to land on them again. Not so with Runequest. Think of Runequest as a fantasy setting in which everyone has access to magic. It's extraordinarily difficult to create a character without some sort of spellcasting ability. Only one feeble player managed that in all the time we played the game. It's possible to create non-human characters. That's standard in fantasy role-playing games. Runequest gave players the option of creating ducks as characters. I could never get this image out of my head. Howard the Duck in a sword and sorcery movie. Players would never create characters like, "First time out in the Runequest world, welcome to the duck who worshipped the trickster god." 2 characters walked into that tavern. The other character waddled. This place of food and rest was a jumping-off point for the adventure. They never played the adventure. The duck walked into the soldier's room, opened the bottom drawer of a chest of drawers, climbed in and said this would be his bed for the night. An argument broke out. The swordsman, predictably, drew his sword. This would have turned to player-on-player violence, but for hammering at the window. The soldier marched over and drew the curtains back. There perched the third player up a ladder, nailing a plucked chicken to the window frame. This was never explained. To this day, we've had no explanation for that. He didn't stop hammering either. No, he made sure the chicken was nailed there before sliding down the ladder and running away. The swordsman returned to the problem at hand. There, now using a towel as a blanket, the duck settled down in the improvised bed. The soldier resented the intrusion, but the duck resented paying for a full-sized room that he could only gain partial use of. That argument was dismissed as bogus. The soldier's temper snapped, and he made to attack the duck. For his part, the duck called upon the trickster god for aid. Worshippers of the gods can ask for divine intervention. It's a powerful, though vague, wish effect, extending as far as resurrecting a very truly dead character. Power is an important characteristic in the game and is drained during divine intervention. The player attempts to roll power on a d100. If successful, the number rolled is the power lost. A character with 10 power rolls 9 and is successful, dropping to a power of 1, which puts that poor bastard in the same line of country as a zombie. The duck asked for divine intervention, and he fired off a plea to the trickster god before the swordsman swung the blade at his feathery frame. "Trickster god, swap this man's head with his arse." And he only goes and makes the fucking roll. In the confusion, he decides it's best to waddle off to pastures new. No one plays the official portion of the adventure away from the inn, and no one plays those characters or ducks again. There were many other meetings in taverns, at inns, and in pubs. Nothing quite tops the duck incident for throwing an adventure away at the start.